The electrical power grid is less reliable than it used to be. Major disruptions and power outages have increased over the past 20 years, just as more Americans are becoming more reliant on electricity. Katherine Blunt is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. She covers renewable energy and utilities. Katherine, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So electrical power plants are largely owned and operated by private companies. What's the role of the federal government in ensuring reliability of the grid?
Yeah, so about 20 years ago, a number of regions undertook efforts to deregulate the power sector. And by that, I mean break up legacy utilities to make it so that these, as you say, private companies could own power plants and produce power. And in doing that, the federal government took a larger role in making sure that the grid remained reliable during this transition, and it has that role to this day. So it's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that's tasked with making sure that you do see that stability and reliability in different regions, except for Texas, which is not subject to that oversight.
The transmission and distribution system is quite old. Is that being upgraded and replaced, or should there just be a transition to renewable energy sources?
Well, I think that both things need to happen at the same time, and both things are happening at the same time. So we are seeing a very rapid shift to renewable energy sources to reduce carbon emissions, and it's also just wind and solar power are some of the cheapest forms of generation right now. So a lot of this is market driven. At the same time, a lot of the different components of the grid are decades old, and in some cases, perhaps even 100 years old. When you think about the build out of the transmission system, which is really the backbone of the grid. Some of it was built before World War II. So utility companies and others are investing in trying to replace some of that infrastructure to support not only the transition, but just to make it so that the system is more resilient in light of stronger storms and other things that are driven by climate change. And so we also have a situation in which electricity demand is expected to increase quite a bit in the coming years as more consumers adopt electric vehicles, do more to electrify their homes. And so the grid also needs to be bolstered to support that additional demand.
Well, as you said, climate change is having an effect on the electrical grid since a lot of the transmission lines are overhead and not underground. Are the new lines being put underground?
There are some proposals to put lines underground, but that's not at this point an especially common proposal. And part of the big reason for that is cost. It's largely expensive to retrofit the overhead system to run underground, and then it's also you have to have a different approach to maintenance when you do that because it involves digging if there's an issue. Generally speaking, it's simply not something that most utilities have chosen to adopt at scale. With one exception, which is PG&E in California is attempting to bury a lot of wires to reduce wildfire risk.
So what's the plan then besides the burying of cables? What's the plan to improve the resiliency of the electrical grid against those climate disasters?
A big part of it is replacing existing equipment with equipment that is stronger, more modern, and there are technologies too that can be adopted to help restore power more quickly after faults, other things along those lines. But when you think about it, I mean, it's just when you think about a transmission line that was built 100 years ago, and this is an extreme example, but the technology was completely different. The types of material used were completely different. And so we have better options today, and utilities are working very hard to make it so that the system is more modernized.
So let's talk about renewables like wind and solar. Utility companies are looking at battery storage for when the sun goes down or it's not windy enough. Where are we on the technology to support that capability?
Yeah, so battery technology has improved a lot in the last several years, and it's also become a lot more cost effective. So utilities are moving very quickly to adopt more large-scale storage applications, really large grid-scale batteries, as you say, to store intermittent power and dispatch it when it's needed. Now, at this time, most of these batteries store power 4 hours, or rather discharge it for 4 hours. So that gives you a solution if there's you say in the evening when solar power generation goes down, perhaps in California, these batteries could play a large role in helping the grid through that evening period in which demand is high, but power production is lower. Now, most grid operators across the country agree that longer duration storage is really going to be critical as more renewable energy comes online. because there could be periods of time in which there's really low wind and solar output, maybe over the course of several days, making it so that you do need those longer duration batteries to carry you through that kind of challenge. And that technology is underway. There are several companies with some very interesting solutions and they're approaching commercialization, but it's still early days, and it's going to take a while for that technology to be deployed at scale.
So, Katherine, what impact do you think the bipartisan infrastructure deal will have on improving the reliability of the grid? Is there funding going towards that?
Yeah, there is funding going towards that, and it can only help. Some of it is encouraged to is dedicated to upgrading and expanding the transmission system, which is going to be very critical in when you consider where we're building wind and solar farms. Right, a lot of it is in more remote areas with large expanses of land. We need more wires to carry that power to population centers. And as we were talking about earlier, there needs to be funding for upgrades. So it's the infrastructure bill doesn't do as much as certain proponents were hoping to modernize the system, but it's a start.
All right. Well, Katherine, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.